Hi, I'm Emma, and yes, my own parents sold my $47,000 college fund behind my back to pay for my sister's extravagant wedding, leaving me with nothing but broken promises and a mountain of debt. They thought they'd gotten away with it, that I'd just accept their betrayal and figure out my own way through college. But what they didn't know was that an anonymous scholarship would soon arrive in my mailbox, one that would not only save my education but reveal a family secret so shocking. It would completely rewrite everything I thought I knew about who I really am. Stay with me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. It started with what should have been the happiest moment of my senior year. I was sitting in my guidance counselor's office at Roosevelt High School in Columbus, Ohio, my acceptance letter to Northwestern University spread across Mrs. Patterson's desk like a treasure map to my future. The thick envelope had arrived 3 days earlier, and I'd been carrying it everywhere since, afraid that if I let it out of my sight, somehow the opportunity might disappear. "This is incredible, Emma," Mrs. Patterson said, adjusting her reading glasses as she reviewed my financial aid package. "Northwestern is offering you a partial scholarship based on your academic performance, but you'll still need about $35,000 per year for tuition, room, and board." She looked up at me with that mixture of pride and concern that had become familiar over the past few months. "Have you discussed the finances with your parents?" I nodded confidently, though a small knot of anxiety had started forming in my stomach. My college fund should cover most of it. My parents started saving when I was born, and last time we talked about it, there was around $47,000 saved up. The number had been burned into my memory since my 16th birthday when my father, Robert, had sat me down for what he called our financial future talk. Mrs. Patterson smiled warmly. "That's wonderful. Your parents clearly prioritize education. With your fund plus the partial scholarship and maybe a small student loan, you should be in excellent shape." She began organizing the paperwork. "I'll need the financial documentation from your parents within the next 2 weeks to finalize everything with Northwestern's financial aid office." That evening, I practically floated home to our modest 2-story house on Maple Street. The late April air carried the scent of blooming dogwood trees, and everything felt pregnant with possibility. I'd worked so hard for this moment, for years of advanced placement classes, countless hours of studying, weekends spent volunteering at the local animal shelter instead of hanging out with friends, while other kids were posting party photos. On social media, I was researching universities, writing essays, and maintaining the 4.2 GPA that had caught Northwestern's attention. My younger sister Chloe's car was in the driveway, which meant she was home from her job at the boutique downtown. At 22, Chloe had taken a different path than me. She'd skipped college entirely, preferring what she called real-world experience to classroom learning. Where I was methodical and future-focused, Chloe lived entirely in the present, something our parents had always found charming rather than concerning. I found my family gathered in the kitchen, an unusual occurrence since we rarely ate dinner together anymore. My mother, Linda, was setting the table with our good china, the kind we usually reserved for holidays. My father sat at the head of the table reading the newspaper, and Chloe was animatedly describing something that had happened at work, her hands gesturing dramatically as she spoke. "Emma," my mother called out when she spotted me. "Perfect timing. We're having a family dinner to celebrate some exciting news." I slid into my usual seat, still clutching my Northwestern acceptance letter. "Actually, I have some pretty exciting news too." I placed the letter on the table with a grin. Northwestern University accepted me with a partial scholarship. The reaction wasn't quite what I'd expected. Instead of the immediate celebration I'd imagined, my parents exchanged a quick glance that I couldn't quite interpret. Chloe looked up from her phone with mild interest, but my father's expression remained carefully neutral. "That's wonderful, honey," my mother said, though her smile seemed forced. "We're so proud of you." "What's the exciting news you mentioned?" I asked, noticing that nobody had picked up my acceptance letter to examine it. Chloe practically bounced in her seat. "Jake proposed." She thrust out her left hand, displaying a diamond ring that caught the kitchen light. "We're getting married in August, and Mom and Dad said they'd help make it the wedding of my dreams." I felt genuinely happy for my sister, despite our different approaches to life. Jake Morrison had been dating Chloe for 2 years, and he seemed like a decent guy, even if he did work at his father's auto repair shop without much ambition beyond that. "Congratulations," I said, reaching over to examine the ring. "It's beautiful." "Show her the plans," my mother encouraged, suddenly animated in a way she hadn't been about my college acceptance. Chloe pulled out her phone and began scrolling through screenshots of venues, floral arrangements, and elaborate wedding dresses. "We're thinking the Riverside Country Club for the reception." It's a little expensive, but Mom said not to worry about the budget. This is a once-in-a-lifetime event. A warning bell started ringing in the back of my mind. The Riverside Country Club was the most expensive venue in Columbus, the kind of place where local politicians and business owners held their events. I'd driven past it countless times on my way to my part-time job at the library, always wondering what it would be like to attend an event there. How much is all this going to cost? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Don't worry about that, my father interjected, finally looking up from his newspaper. Your mother and I have been planning for this day since Chloe was little. Every girl deserves a fairy tale wedding. Something about his phrasing bothered me, though I couldn't put my finger on exactly what. But what about Northwestern? I need to submit the financial aid documents soon, and Mrs. Patterson said, we'll figure that out, my mother interrupted, beginning to clear the table even though we hadn't eaten yet. There are always student loans, work-study programs, community college options. Education is important, but so is family. The knot in my stomach tightened. Community college options? Mom, I got into Northwestern University. This is what we've been working toward my entire life. Chloe looked up from her phone with a slight frown. Don't be dramatic, Emma. College will always be there. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. But I'm only getting married once, and I want it to be perfect. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling of my small bedroom, trying to process the conversation. My parents had seemed genuinely excited about Chloe's wedding, but their response to my Northwestern acceptance had been lukewarm at best. I told myself I was overreacting, that they were just processing the news and would be more enthusiastic once the initial shock wore off. The next morning, I decided to approach the topic more directly. I found my father in his home office, paying bills at the old wooden desk that had belonged to his father. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating the stack of invoices and bank statements spread across the surface. Dad, can we talk about Northwestern? I asked, settling into the chair across from his desk. He looked up with what seemed like resignation. Of course. What specifically did you want to discuss? The college fund. I need to know exactly how much is available so I can finalize the financial aid paperwork. I pulled out a notebook where I'd calculated various scenarios. If there's $47,000 like you mentioned before, plus my partial scholarship and a small loan, I should be able to make it work. My father was quiet for a long moment, his pen tapping against the desk in a rhythm that matched my increasing heartbeat. Finally, he set the pen down and looked directly at me. Emma, I need to tell you something, and I need you to understand that this decision wasn't made lightly. The knot in my stomach transformed into a cold, sinking feeling. What decision? The college fund. We've had to make some adjustments to our financial priorities. He gestured toward the bills on his desk. Your mother's medical bills. From last year, the roof repair, some unexpected business expenses. The fund isn't quite what it used to be. I felt the room tilt slightly. What do you mean it isn't what it used to be? How much is left? Another long pause. About $8,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. 8,000? Dad, that's not even enough for one semester. What happened to the other $39,000? Life happened, Emma. Sometimes we have to make sacrifices for the good of the family. His tone had shifted from apologetic to defensive. We always said we'd help with college, and we will. $8,000 is still a substantial contribution. I stared at him, trying to process this information. But you specifically told me there was $47,000. I've been planning my entire future around that number. Plans change, he said simply. You're smart, resourceful. You'll find a way to make it work. There are scholarships, grants, work-study programs. Your generation has more options than we ever did. Something about his tone made me suspicious. Dad, where did the money go? Specifically? He shuffled the papers on his desk, avoiding eye contact. I told you. Medical bills, home repairs, business expenses. Mom's medical bills were covered by insurance. I remember because you complained about the copays, which were maybe a few $100s total. And the roof repair was $3,000. Where's the rest of the money? Emma, I don't appreciate this interrogation. Your mother and I have worked hard to provide for this family, and we don't owe you a detailed accounting of every financial decision we make. But I was already connecting dots that I'd been deliberately ignoring. This is about Chloe's wedding, isn't it? You used my college fund to pay for Chloe's wedding. The silence that followed was answer enough. Dad, tell me you didn't take my college fund to pay for a wedding. He finally looked up, his expression a mixture of guilt and defiance. It's not that simple. Chloe needed help, and the wedding is important to your mother. family celebrations matter, Emma. They bring people together, create memories. Education is valuable, but so are the bonds that hold a family together. I felt like I was drowning. You stole my future to pay for one day of celebration. Don't be dramatic. We didn't steal anything. That money belonged to your mother and me, and we used it to benefit our family. Chloe is family too. But it was designated for my education. You've been telling me since I was 6 years old that this money was for my college. And we always intended for it to be. But sometimes life requires us to adapt our plans. You're 18 years old, Emma. You're smart, capable, driven. You'll find another way to pay for college. Chloe might not get another chance at the wedding she's dreamed of. I stood up abruptly, my notebook falling to the floor. So my dreams matter less than Chloe's? That's not what I said. It's exactly what you said. You just prioritized a party over my education. My father's expression hardened. Watch your tone, young lady. Your mother and I have sacrificed plenty for both of you girls. We've gone without vacations, driven old cars, lived in this small house so we could provide for you. Don't act like we've never done anything for you. I bent to pick up my notebook, my hands shaking with anger and hurt. You're right. You have sacrificed for us. But apparently only one of us gets to benefit from those sacrifices. That afternoon, I called Mrs. Patterson to explain the situation. Her initial shock gave way to practical problem-solving mode, but the options she presented were grim. With only $8,000 in my partial scholarship, I would need to take out massive student loans to attend Northwestern. Even with work-study and summer jobs, I'd graduate with over $150,000 in debt. There are other options, she said gently. State schools are excellent, and much more affordable. Community college for the first 2 years, then transfer. Or you could take a gap year, work full-time, and reapply with a larger savings foundation. Each suggestion felt like a door closing on the future I'd worked so hard to create. Northwestern wasn't just a school to me, it was validation that all my sacrifices had meant something. The late nights studying while my friends went to parties, the weekends spent working at the library instead of hanging out at the mall, the careful budgeting of every dollar from my part-time job to buy school supplies and save for application fees. I walked home from school that day taking the long route, needing time to process what felt like the complete dismantling of my life plan. The spring evening was beautiful, with flowering trees lining the sidewalks and the sound of children playing in nearby yards. Everything around me looked the same, but my world had fundamentally shifted. When I arrived home, Chloe was in the living room surrounded by wedding magazines, fabric samples, and what appeared to be catering menus. She looked up with excitement when I walked in. Emma. Perfect timing. I need your opinion on flowers. Do you think roses are too traditional, or should I go with something more unique like peonies? I stared at her, surrounded by the evidence of thousands of dollars being spent on a single day while my dreams crumbled. I don't care about your flowers, Chloe. Her smile faltered. What's wrong with you? I thought you'd be excited to help plan the wedding. Mom and Dad used my college fund to pay for your wedding. She blinked several times, processing this information. Oh. They didn't tell me that specifically. They just said they'd handle the costs. $39,000, Chloe. They took $39,000 that was supposed to pay for my education so you could have your dream wedding. Chloe set down the magazine she'd been holding. I'm sorry, Emma. I really am. But I didn't ask them to use that money. They offered to pay for the wedding, and I assumed they had planned for it. Did you ask where the money was coming from? A slight pause. No. I trusted that they knew what they were doing financially. Because it didn't occur to you that there might be consequences for anyone else. That's not fair. I'm not responsible for Mom and Dad's financial decisions. She was right, technically. But her willingness to accept an expensive wedding without questioning the source felt typical of how Chloe moved through the world, taking what was offered without considering the broader implications. What am I supposed to do now? I asked, sinking into the armchair across from her. I can't afford Northwestern. I can barely afford state school. Chloe fidgeted with her engagement ring. Maybe this is a sign that college isn't the right path for you right now. There are other ways to be successful. Look at Jake, he makes good money at the auto shop, and he never went to college. The suggestion felt like a slap. Chloe, I've wanted to be a pediatric nurse since I was 12 years old. I've planned every academic decision around getting into a strong pre-nursing program. This isn't about money or status, it's about my calling. Callings can change, she said softly. Maybe this is an opportunity to explore other options. I looked at my sister, sitting amid the evidence of her fairy tale wedding, suggesting that I abandon my dreams because they'd become inconvenient for the family budget. In that moment, I realized something fundamental about our relationship. that I'd never fully acknowledged. Chloe had always been the priority, and I had always been expected to adapt around her needs. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to give up on Northwestern, and I wasn't going to let my family's betrayal define my future. I had 2 months before I needed to finalize my college plans. 2 months. To find a solution that didn't involve crushing debt or abandoning my dreams. I pulled out my laptop and began researching every scholarship, grant, and financial aid option available to high school seniors. I created spreadsheets tracking application deadlines, requirements, and award amounts. I reached out to organizations I'd never heard of, applied for scholarships with long odds, and wrote essay after essay explaining my situation and my goals. But as the weeks passed and rejection letters began arriving, I felt my options narrowing. The scholarships I qualified for were small, a few $100s here, 1,000 there. Even combined, they wouldn't bridge the gap between what my family could provide and what I needed. 3 weeks before my deadline to accept or decline Northwestern's offer, I was sitting at my desk surrounded by rejection letters when I heard my mother call my name from downstairs. I found her in the kitchen holding a large manila envelope with my name written in elegant script. "This just arrived," she said, handing me the envelope. "There's no return address." I examined the envelope carefully. My name and address were written in black ink, but there was no postmark, no stamps. Someone had delivered this by hand. Inside, I found a single sheet of cream-colored paper with a letterhead I didn't recognize, the Morrison Family Foundation. The letter was brief but stunning. "Dear Miss Emma Rodriguez, it has come to our attention that you have been accepted to Northwestern University with aspirations of pursuing a career in pediatric nursing. We understand that financial circumstances may be preventing you from accepting this opportunity. The Morrison Family Foundation is pleased to offer you a full scholarship covering tuition, room, board, and expenses for your undergraduate education at Northwestern University. This scholarship is renewable annually based on satisfactory academic progress. Please contact our representative at the number below to arrange for fund disbursement. Congratulations on your acceptance and your commitment to serving others through healthcare. Sincerely, the Morrison Family Foundation." I read the letter 3 times, my hands shaking. A full scholarship. From a foundation I'd never heard of. Morrison, the same last name as Chloe's fiancé. My mother was watching my face intently. "Good news? Someone just offered me a full scholarship to Northwestern," I said slowly. "The Morrison Family Foundation." Her reaction was immediate and telling. The color drained from her face, and she sat down heavily in the nearest chair. "Mom, do you know anything about this foundation?" She was quiet for a long moment, staring at the letter in my hands. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Emma, there's something your father and I never told you. Something we thought you never needed to know." The world seemed to stop spinning. "What are you talking about?" "The Morrison family. Jake's family, they're not just local business owners. David Morrison, Jake's father, he owns Morrison Industries. It's one of the largest manufacturing companies in Ohio." I stared at her, processing this information. "So they're wealthy. That doesn't explain why they'd give me a scholarship." My mother's hands were trembling now. "Emma, David Morrison, he's your biological father." The words hung in the air like a physical presence, pressing down on me until I couldn't breathe. David Morrison was my biological father. The man whose son was marrying my sister was actually my father. I felt the kitchen walls closing in around me as I tried to process what my mother had just revealed. "That's impossible," I whispered. Though even as I said it, pieces of a puzzle I hadn't known existed began clicking into place. "Dad is my father. Robert Rodriguez is my father." My mother's eyes filled with tears as she shook her head slowly. "Robert has been your father in every way that matters. He raised you, loved you, provided for you. But biologically, yes, David Morrison is your father." I sank into the chair across from her, the scholarship letter crumpling in my grip. "How is that possible? When? Why didn't you tell me?" "I was 19, she began, her voice catching. "Working as a receptionist at Morrison Industries, putting myself through community college at night. David was 25, recently divorced. And I was so young and impressionable. He was charming, successful, everything I thought I wanted in a man." The kitchen felt like it was spinning around me. "You had an affair with your boss?" "It wasn't an affair exactly. David was legally separated, going through his divorce. I genuinely believed we had a future together." She wiped her eyes with a dish towel. "When I found out I was pregnant with you, I was terrified but also hopeful. I thought maybe this would make him more serious about our relationship. But it didn't. His divorce was finalized right around the time I told him about the pregnancy. Suddenly he was a free man again, and apparently a teenage receptionist with a baby wasn't part of his vision for his new life. The bitterness in her voice was sharp enough to cut. He offered me money for an abortion. When I refused, he offered me money to go away quietly. I felt nauseous. And you took it? I took some of it, she admitted. Enough to get by until you were born and I could figure out my next steps. I quit my job, moved back in with my parents temporarily, and that's where I met your father, Robert. He was working construction then, renting the apartment above my parents' garage. The man I'd always known as my father suddenly took on heroic dimensions in my mind. He knew about me? About the pregnancy? I told him everything on our third date. I figured he deserved to know what he was potentially getting into. A small smile crossed her face. He said he didn't care about my past, that he'd love any child I brought into the world as if it were his own. And he has, Emma. He's never treated you as anything less than his daughter. Does he know about the scholarship? About David Morrison reaching out? My mother shook her head. He's at work. This letter arrived about 20 minutes before you got home from school. I looked down at the crumpled scholarship letter, trying to make sense of what this meant. Why now? Why is David Morrison suddenly interested in helping me after 18 years of pretending I don't exist? I don't know, my mother said softly. Maybe he's had a change of heart. Maybe he's been keeping track of your accomplishments somehow. A horrible thought occurred to me. Does Jake know? Does Chloe know? The look on my mother's face answered my question before she spoke. No. David and I agreed that the secret would stay between us. He promised never to interfere in your life, and in exchange, I promised never to pursue him for child support or acknowledgement. But if Jake is my half-brother, and he's marrying Chloe, the implications made my head spin. This is insane. My sister is marrying my half-brother, and nobody knows except you and David Morrison. Emma, please calm down. Let's think about this rationally. Rationally? I stood up abruptly, knocking my chair backward. My entire life is a lie. The man I call Dad isn't my real father. My real father is rich enough to casually offer full college scholarships but has never acknowledged my existence. My sister is unknowingly marrying my half-brother, and you think I should be rational? Jake and Chloe aren't blood relatives, my mother said firmly. There's nothing wrong with their relationship from a genetic standpoint. But it's still weird and complicated and nobody knows the truth except us. I began pacing around the kitchen, my mind racing. How could you keep this secret for 18 years? Because I thought it was for the best. David made it clear. He wanted nothing to do with you, and Robert stepped up to be your father. Why complicate things with biology when you already had a dad who loved you? I stopped pacing and stared at her. Because I had a right to know. Because there might have been medical information I needed. Because I've spent my entire life thinking we were too poor to afford things when apparently my biological father is wealthy enough to own manufacturing companies. We are too poor to afford things, my mother snapped, showing the first flash of anger since this conversation began. David Morrison's money was never available to us. He made that abundantly clear. Until now. Until now, she agreed. Quietly. I picked up the scholarship letter again, smoothing out the wrinkles I'd created. This changes everything. If I accept this scholarship, I'm accepting help from a man who abandoned me before I was even born. But if I don't accept it, I lose my chance at Northwestern and potentially my entire future. What are you going to do? Before I could answer, I heard my father's, Robert's, truck pulling into the driveway. The familiar sound of the diesel engine that had provided the soundtrack to my childhood suddenly felt different, loaded with new meaning. This man who had worked double shifts and weekend jobs to provide for us, who had never missed a school play or parent-teacher conference, who had taught me to drive and helped me with calculus homework, wasn't my biological father but had chosen to be my dad anyway. We have to tell him, I said. He deserves to know about the scholarship and where it came from. My mother nodded reluctantly. You're right. But Emma, please remember when we tell him that Robert loves you more than his own life. Finding out about David Morrison doesn't change that. Robert came through the back door carrying his lunch cooler and wearing the tired expression of someone who'd spent 10 hours installing drywall. His face lit up when he saw me, the same way it had every day for as long as I could remember. There's my college girl, he said, kissing the top of my head. How was school today? The casual affection in his voice made my chest tight with emotion. This man had been my father in every way that mattered, and now I had to tell him that. My biological father was offering me something he could never provide. Dad, we need to talk to you about something, I said, my voice unsteady. His expression immediately shifted to concern. What's wrong? Is everything okay? My mother gestured for him to sit down, then handed him the scholarship letter. This arrived today. Robert read the letter slowly, his eyebrows rising as he processed the information. This is incredible, Emma. A full scholarship? How did you even apply for this? I didn't, I said quietly. Dad, there's something Mom needs to tell you about who David Morrison is. The next 20 minutes were among the most difficult of my life. I watched my father's face cycle through confusion, shock, hurt, and finally a complex mixture of emotions I couldn't entirely read as my mother explained the history she'd kept hidden for 18 years. To his credit, Robert never raised his voice or showed anger toward my mother, though I could see the pain in his eyes when she described her relationship with David Morrison. So this scholarship is coming from Emma's biological father, he said finally, his voice carefully controlled. It appears so, my mother confirmed. Robert looked at me with the same steady gaze that had comforted me through skinned knees, failed tests, and teenage heartbreak. What do you want to do, kiddo? The question caught me off guard. Not what should I do, or what was right, but what did I want? I don't know. Part of me wants to tear up the letter and never think about David Morrison again. But another part of me knows this might be my only chance at Northwestern. Those are both valid feelings, Robert said. But let me ask you this, if some other wealthy family had offered you this scholarship, would you take it? Of course. Then the real question is whether you can separate the opportunity from the complicated emotions around who's providing it. I hadn't expected such clear thinking from someone who had just learned that his daughter's biological father was wealthy enough to casually fund college educations. Aren't you angry? At him, at Mom, at the situation? Robert was quiet for a moment, considering his words. I'm hurt that your mother felt she couldn't trust me with this information sooner. I'm frustrated that David Morrison has been able to live his life without consequence while we've struggled financially. But angry at you? Never. And angry enough to let it ruin your future? Absolutely not. But if I take this money, doesn't that feel like betraying our family? Like saying his money is more important than everything you've provided? Emma, look at me. Robert's voice was firm but gentle. I've been your father for 18 years. I was there when you took your first steps, spoke your first words, lost your first tooth. I taught you to ride a bike, helped you with homework, cheered at every soccer game and school play. David Morrison's DNA doesn't erase any of that. Tears were streaming down my face now. But it feels like I'm choosing him over you. You're not choosing him over me. You're choosing your education and your future. If David Morrison wants to feel better about 18 years of absence by writing a check, that's his business. What matters is what you do with the opportunity. My mother had been quietly crying throughout this conversation, and now she spoke up. Robert, I'm so sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I was scared it would change how you felt about Emma, about us. Linda, the only thing that could change how I feel about Emma is if she stopped being the remarkable young woman we raised her to be. He turned back to me. That said, if you decide to accept this scholarship, we need to set some boundaries. This is educational funding, not an invitation for David Morrison to suddenly play father. What do you mean? I mean you take his money for college, but you don't owe him a relationship. You don't owe him gratitude beyond a thank you note. You don't owe him access to your life or your achievements. He's paying for your education, not buying a place in your family. The clarity of Robert's perspective helped settle something inside me. So you think I should take it? I think you should call the number on that letter and find out exactly what strings are attached. Then you make an informed decision based on what's best for your future, not what's most emotionally comfortable in the moment. That evening, after Robert had gone to take a shower and my mother had started preparing dinner, I found myself alone with the scholarship letter and 100 unanswered questions. I called the phone number listed at the bottom, expecting to reach an administrative assistant or voicemail system. Instead, a warm female voice answered on the second ring. Morrison Foundation, this is Patricia speaking. Hi, this is Emma Rodriguez. I received a scholarship letter today and was told to call this number. Emma? Yes, we've been expecting your call. Congratulations on your acceptance to Northwestern. I understand you're interested in pursuing pediatric nursing? The friendliness in her voice caught me off guard. Yes, that's right. I have some questions about the scholarship terms and conditions. Of course. Let me pull up your file. I heard typing in the background. The scholarship covers full tuition, room and board, a book allowance, and a modest living stipend. It's renewable each year as long as you maintain a 3.0 GPA and remain enrolled in good standing. Are there any other requirements? Community service, reporting obligations, meetings with foundation representatives? Nothing beyond what I just mentioned. This is what we call a no-strings-attached scholarship. The foundation believes in supporting promising students without creating additional burden on their academic schedules. Her answer was almost too good to be true. Can I ask how I was selected? I never applied for this scholarship. There was a slight pause. The foundation sometimes identifies candidates through various channels: academic recommendations, community involvement records, that sort of thing. Your guidance counselor spoke very highly of your academic achievements and career goals. Mrs. Patterson recommended me. She provided some information about your circumstances, yes. I hope that's not a concern? I thought about Mrs. Patterson knowing about my family's financial betrayal, possibly reaching out to scholarship organizations on my behalf. It was embarrassing but also touching that she'd advocated for me without my knowledge. No, that's fine. I was just surprised. I took a deep breath. If I accept this scholarship, what's the next step? I'll send you the formal acceptance paperwork. You'll need to sign and return it within 2 weeks, along with your Northwestern enrollment confirmation. The funds will be disbursed directly to the university before the fall semester. And there's truly no expectation of contact with the foundation donor or board members? Another pause, this one longer. Emma, can I speak frankly with you for a moment? My heart rate spiked. Of course. The donor specifically requested that this scholarship be administered anonymously. He doesn't want recognition, meetings, or ongoing contact. He simply wants to ensure that a deserving student has the opportunity to pursue their educational goals without financial hardship. The words confirmed what I'd already suspected: David Morrison didn't want a relationship with me any more now than he had 18 years ago. He wanted to ease his conscience with money but maintain his distance. The realization was both relieving and painful. I understand, I said quietly. Excellent. You should receive the paperwork within 3 business days. And Emma? Congratulations again. Northwestern is lucky to have you. After I hung up, I sat in my room staring at my Northwestern acceptance letter and the Morrison Foundation scholarship offer. 2 pieces of paper that represented completely different versions of my future. With the scholarship, I could pursue my dreams without crushing debt, but I'd always know that my success was built on money from a man who'd abandoned me. Without it, I'd struggle financially but maintain my independence and pride. I thought about Chloe downstairs, probably still surrounded by wedding magazines and fabric samples, blissfully unaware that she was marrying her half-sister's half-brother. I thought about my parents, both of them, and the complex web of secrets and sacrifices that had shaped our family. I thought about David Morrison, successful and wealthy, offering money as a substitute for acknowledgement or love. But mostly, I thought about the 12-year-old version of myself who had decided she wanted to be a pediatric nurse after watching the medical team care for her when she'd broken her arm falling from a tree. That little girl had never cared about money or family drama or complicated relationships. She just wanted to help sick children feel better. 2 days later, I made my decision. I called Patricia back and accepted the scholarship, but not before setting my own conditions. I would take David Morrison's money, but I would earn every dollar of it through academic excellence and dedication to my field. I would use his funding to become the best pediatric nurse possible, not because I owed him anything, but because I owed it to myself and to the children I would someday care for. The formal paperwork arrived exactly when Patricia had promised. As I signed my name on the acceptance documents, I felt a strange sense of closure. David Morrison had given me life 18 years ago, then walked away. Now he was giving me an education, and I would use it to build a life entirely of my own making. But even as I sealed the envelope containing my signed scholarship acceptance, I knew this decision would create new complications. Chloe's wedding was still happening in 3 months, and Jake Morrison would become my brother-in-law without knowing he was also my half-brother. My parents would continue to navigate their complex feelings about David Morrison's sudden involvement in my life. And I would have to find a way to attend Northwestern University while carrying the weight of family secrets that seemed to grow heavier by the day. The night before I mailed my acceptance papers, I had dinner with my family at our usual spots around the kitchen table. Chloe chatted about final wedding preparations, my mother shared news from her job at the medical office, and Robert talked about a promotion opportunity at his construction company. For a moment, sitting there surrounded by the people who had raised and loved me, the complications of my biological father felt distant and manageable. But as I looked around the table, I realized that accepting David Morrison's scholarship had already begun to change me. I was no longer just Emma Rodriguez, the studious daughter who worked hard and followed the rules. I was also Emma Rodriguez, the girl whose biological father was wealthy enough to solve her problems with a check, who carried secrets that could potentially destroy her sister's happiness, who had access to opportunities that her family could never provide. The question that kept me awake that night wasn't whether I'd made the right decision about the scholarship. It was whether I could carry the weight of these secrets to Northwestern and beyond, or whether the truth would eventually demand to be told regardless of the consequences for everyone involved. As I finally drifted off to sleep, I wondered if David Morrison realized that by offering me this scholarship, he hadn't just changed my educational prospects. He'd set in motion a series of revelations and decisions that would reshape our entire family, whether he intended to or not. The anonymous benefactor who wanted no ongoing contact had inadvertently ensured that our lives would remain entangled in ways none of us could fully predict or control. The weeks following my acceptance of the Morrison Foundation scholarship felt like living in two different realities simultaneously. On the surface, everything appeared normal. I continued attending classes, working my shifts at the library, and helping with last-minute wedding preparations that seemed to multiply daily. But underneath this facade of normalcy, I was carefully orchestrating a plan that would allow me to navigate the complex web of secrets surrounding my family while protecting everyone involved. My first strategic decision was to compartmentalize the information I'd learned. Robert and my mother knew about David Morrison being my biological father, but Chloe and Jake remained blissfully unaware of their true relationship. I decided this was how things needed to stay, at least until after the wedding. The potential chaos that could result from revealing the truth wasn't worth the temporary satisfaction of honesty. Instead, I focused on what I could control, preparing for Northwestern, while gathering information about the Morrison family that might help me understand the situation better. I started with what should have been simple research but quickly became an exercise in digital detective work. David Morrison wasn't just wealthy, he was strategically wealthy, the kind of businessman who maintained a carefully curated public presence while keeping his private life meticulously protected. Morrison Industries had started as a small metal fabrication shop in the 1980s and had grown into a multi-million-dollar manufacturing empire with contracts throughout the Midwest. David Morrison appeared in business journals and local newspapers as a civic leader and philanthropist, always photographed at charity events and community fundraisers. But personal information about him was remarkably scarce. No social media presence, no family photos in the society pages, no mention of children or personal relationships. I found exactly 3 references to his first marriage, the one that had been ending when he and my mother began their relationship. His ex-wife, Caroline Morrison, had apparently remarried and moved to California shortly after their divorce was finalized. There were no mentions of children from that marriage, which meant Jake was likely David's only acknowledged child. This revelation created a new layer of complexity I hadn't anticipated. If Jake was David Morrison's only known heir, what did that mean for me? Had David reached out with the scholarship because he felt guilty about ignoring one child while grooming another to inherit his business empire? Or was this simply a wealthy man's way of clearing his conscience without actually acknowledging wrongdoing? My investigation into the Morrison family led me to spend more time observing Jake during the frequent wedding planning sessions at our house. I'd always liked Jake well enough. He was kind to Chloe, respectful to my parents, and had a genuine enthusiasm for his work at the auto shop that I found endearing. But now I studied him with new eyes, looking for similarities that might hint at our shared DNA. The physical resemblance was subtle but present once I knew what to look for. We both had the same dark hair that curled slightly when it got too long, the same tendency to tap our fingers when we were thinking, and the same way of tilting our heads when we were listening intently to someone speak. More significantly, Jake had an attention to detail and methodical approach to problem-solving that reminded me of my own personality traits, characteristics that had always seemed out of place in our family of more spontaneous personalities. "You've been quiet lately," Chloe observed one evening as we addressed wedding invitations at the kitchen table. "Are you nervous about starting college?" The question gave me an opening I'd been looking for. "Actually, I wanted to ask you something about Jake's family. I realized I don't know much about them, and since they're about to become my in-laws too, I thought I should learn more." Chloe's face lit up with the opportunity to talk about her favorite subject. "Jake's dad is amazing. So successful and generous. He's paying for most of the wedding, actually, which was such a relief when Mom and Dad started worrying about costs." My stomach dropped. "David Morrison is paying for your wedding?" "Well, not directly. He gave Jake money to contribute to wedding expenses, and Jake insisted on covering the big stuff like the venue and catering. Isn't that sweet?" The irony was almost unbearable. David Morrison was funding Chloe's wedding while simultaneously funding my education, and neither of his children knew about their connection to each other. He was playing puppet master with all our lives while maintaining his careful distance from any actual involvement. "What's he like?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "David Morrison, I mean. Honestly? A little intimidating. Very serious, very business-focused. But he clearly loves Jake, and he's been nothing but welcoming to me." Chloe paused in her addressing to look up at me. "Why all the questions?" "Just curious. I want to make a good impression when I meet him at the wedding." "You'll be fine. Just be yourself, smart, polite, responsible. He'll probably love that Jake's marrying into a family with such a studious sister. If only she knew how studious I'd been lately, and what I'd been studying. My next strategic move was to establish a support network outside my immediate family. The weight of carrying these secrets was becoming overwhelming, and I needed trusted allies who could provide perspective without being emotionally invested in the outcome. My first call was to Mrs. Patterson, who had inadvertently set this entire chain of events in motion by reaching out to scholarship organizations on my behalf. "Emma, I'm so glad you called," she said when I reached her at home one evening. "I heard through the grapevine that you received a significant scholarship offer. I hope that's resolving your Northwestern situation?" "It is, but it's also created some complications I need to discuss with someone I trust." We arranged to meet at a coffee shop near the school the following afternoon. Mrs. Patterson had been my guidance counselor for 2 years, and I'd always appreciated her direct, no-nonsense approach to problem solving. If anyone could help me think through the ethical and practical implications of my situation, it would be her. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," she said after I'd explained the David Morrison revelation. "Your biological father, who has never acknowledged your existence, is now funding your education through an anonymous scholarship. Your half-brother is marrying your sister, and neither of them knows about the family connection. And you're trying to decide how much truth to reveal and when." That's the simplified version, yes. Mrs. Patterson was quiet for a long moment, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. "Emma, I have to ask, how did the Morrison Foundation know to offer you this scholarship?" "I reached out to several organizations after our conversation about your financial situation, but the Morrison Foundation wasn't one of them." The question I'd been dreading. "I think David Morrison has been keeping track of my achievements somehow. Maybe through school records, maybe through community connections. Columbus isn't that big a city." "That's possible, but it suggests a level of ongoing interest that contradicts his supposed desire for distance." She leaned forward slightly. "Have you considered that there might be more to this story than what your mother told you?" "What do you mean?" "I mean that people's motivations and circumstances can change significantly over 18 years. The man who walked away from a pregnant teenager might have different feelings about fatherhood as a successful adult, especially if he's been watching his daughter excel academically and personally from afar." The possibility had occurred to me, but I dismissed it as wishful thinking. If that were true, wouldn't he have reached out directly rather than hiding behind an anonymous foundation? Not necessarily. Direct contact would require him to acknowledge 18 years of absence and potentially disrupt the family structure you already have. An anonymous scholarship allows him to help without forcing anyone to deal with complicated emotions or divided loyalties. Her perspective shifted something in my thinking. I'd been viewing David Morrison's scholarship offer as either guilt money or manipulation, but Mrs. Patterson was suggesting a third possibility: genuine care, expressed in the only way he felt was appropriate given the circumstances. "So you think I should accept the scholarship without questioning his motives?" "I think you should accept the scholarship because it serves your educational goals, regardless of his motives. But I also think you should be prepared for the possibility that this won't be the end of David Morrison's involvement in your life." "What do you mean?" "I mean that parents, even absent ones, tend to become more invested in their children's welfare as those children reach major milestones. College graduation, career achievements, marriage, grandchildren, these events have a way of making people reevaluate their priorities and regrets." The conversation with Mrs. Patterson gave me a new framework for thinking about my situation, but it also raised questions I wasn't sure I was ready to answer. If David Morrison was genuinely interested in having some kind of relationship with me, did I want that? And if I did, how could I pursue it without betraying Robert, who had been my real father in every way that mattered? My second strategic alliance came from an unexpected source. 3 weeks before Chloe's wedding, I was working an evening shift at the library when Jake appeared at the reference desk where I usually studied during quiet periods. "Hey Emma, do you have a minute? I wanted to talk to you about something." I looked around the nearly empty library, then gestured for him to take the chair across from my desk. "What's on your mind?" "The wedding, actually. And family stuff." He seemed uncharacteristically nervous, fidgeting with the car keys in his hand. "I know this might sound weird, but I feel like I don't really know you very well, and you're about to be my sister-in-law." The statement hit me with unexpected emotional force. Jake was right, we were about to be family, and if he only knew how accurate that statement really was. "I'd like to know you better too," I said carefully. "What did you want to talk about?" "Honestly? I'm nervous about the wedding. Not about marrying Chloe, I love her completely. But about everything else. The fancy venue, all the money being spent, trying to live up to everyone's expectations." His vulnerability surprised me. Jake had always seemed confident and comfortable with his family's wealth, but apparently the reality of an expensive wedding was creating pressure I hadn't noticed. What kind of expectations? My dad's, mainly. He has very specific ideas about how things should be done, what our family image should look like. Sometimes I feel like I'm playing a role rather than just being myself. The parallel to my own situation was striking. Both of us were navigating complex family dynamics while trying to maintain authentic relationships with the people we cared about. Does Chloe know you feel this way? Not really. She's so excited about everything, and I don't want to ruin that for her. But sometimes I wonder if we should have just eloped instead of dealing with all this complexity. I made a decision that would prove crucial in the weeks to come. Jake, can I tell you something in confidence? He nodded seriously. I understand feeling like you're playing a role to meet family expectations. I've been dealing with something similar lately, trying to figure out how to be true to myself while managing complicated family relationships. What do you mean? I chose my words carefully, wanting to offer support without revealing the secrets I was carrying. I received a scholarship that's allowing me to attend Northwestern, but it came from a source that creates some ethical questions for me. I have to decide whether to accept help that serves my goals even if it comes with emotional complications. And you decided to accept it? I did, but I also decided to set boundaries around it. I'm taking the help I need, while maintaining my own values and priorities. Jake leaned back in his chair, considering this. So you're saying I can appreciate my dad's generosity with the wedding while still being honest about my own preferences? I'm saying that accepting help doesn't mean you have to compromise who you are or what matters to you. Our conversation continued for another hour, ranging from career goals to family dynamics to our shared concern for Chloe's happiness. By the time Jake left the library, I felt like I'd gained not just an ally but a genuine friend, which made the secret of our biological relationship even more painful to carry. The final piece of my strategic preparation involved securing my financial independence beyond the scholarship. David Morrison's funding would cover my education, but I wanted to ensure that I could support myself without relying on family money or feeling obligated to anyone. I applied for a work-study position in Northwestern's pediatric research lab, which would provide both income and valuable experience in my chosen field. The application process required letters of recommendation from professors and community leaders. When I asked Dr. Sarah Chen, a pediatrician who volunteered at the clinic where I'd been doing community service, she surprised me with her response. Emma, I've been hoping you'd apply for opportunities like this. Your work with the children here has been exceptional, and I think you have real potential for advanced study in pediatric medicine. Thank you, Dr. Chen. That means a lot coming from you. Have you considered pursuing pre-med track instead of nursing? With your academic record and research interests, you could easily handle the coursework. The suggestion stopped me cold. I'd been so focused on nursing as my calling that I'd never seriously considered medical school. But as Dr. Chen outlined, the possibilities, pediatric residencies, research opportunities, the chance to impact children's healthcare on a broader scale, I felt a familiar excitement that usually accompanied major revelations. The financial commitment would be significant, I said practically. There are scholarships and loan forgiveness programs for students committed to pediatric medicine, especially those interested in underserved populations. And Northwestern has excellent connections to medical schools throughout the region. That evening, I researched pre-med requirements and medical school admissions statistics until well past midnight. The academic path would be more demanding and expensive than nursing school, but it would also provide opportunities I'd never imagined. More importantly, it would represent a future built entirely on my own merit and choices rather than family expectations or limitations. As Chloe's wedding approached and my departure for Northwestern grew closer, I realized that accepting David Morrison's scholarship had done more than solve my immediate financial crisis. It had forced me to examine every assumption I'd made about my family, my goals, and my own identity. The girl who had always been content to work within existing systems and expectations was discovering a more ambitious version of herself, one who was willing to pursue bigger dreams and take calculated risks to achieve them. The irony wasn't lost on me that this transformation was happening precisely because of the family secrets and financial betrayal that had initially seemed so devastating. Chloe's expensive wedding had revealed my parents' willingness to sacrifice my future for her immediate happiness. David Morrison's scholarship had revealed possibilities I'd never considered and resources I'd never imagined having access to. The combination of these revelations was creating a version of myself that was stronger, more independent, and more strategically minded than the obedient daughter I'd always been. 2 weeks before the wedding, I made my final strategic decision. I would attend the ceremony, smile for the photographs, and celebrate my sister's happiness without revealing the complex web of relationships that made the entire event far more complicated than anyone realized. I would start at Northwestern in the fall with David Morrison's funding, but on my own terms, pursuing goals that were entirely my own rather than what anyone expected of me. And someday, when the time was right and the consequences were manageable, I would find a way to have an honest conversation with David Morrison about what it meant to be his daughter and what kind of relationship, if any, we might be able to build going forward. But for now, I would play the long game, gathering information and building my own foundation of success before dealing with the emotional complexities that would inevitably arise from our shared DNA and conflicted history. The morning of Chloe's wedding dawned with the kind of perfect August weather that seemed designed for outdoor photographs and fairy tale celebrations. I stood at my bedroom window watching the catering trucks arrive at the Riverside Country Club across town, knowing that in 6 hours I would be face to face with David Morrison for the first time in my conscious memory. The man whose DNA I carried but who had never acknowledged my existence would be sitting at the same reception tables, probably making small talk about my college plans without knowing he was funding them. I had rehearsed this moment dozens of times in my mind, planning exactly how I would behave when we were inevitably introduced. Polite but not eager. Respectful but not seeking approval. I would be Emma Rodriguez, Robert's daughter, the studious girl heading to Northwestern on a scholarship. Nothing more, nothing less. My phone buzzed with a text from Jake. Emma, huge favor to ask. Could you help keep my dad entertained during the cocktail hour? He doesn't know many people outside our family and I'll be busy with photos. The request sent my pulse racing. Jake was essentially asking me to spend time alone with David Morrison, making conversation while carrying the weight of everything I knew about our relationship. I typed back a quick agreement, though my hands were trembling as I sent the message. Chloe emerged from her room in full bridal radiance, her wedding dress transforming her into the princess she'd always dreamed of becoming. For a moment, looking at my sister's genuine happiness, all the complexity surrounding our family relationships felt manageable. This was her day, and whatever secrets I was carrying could remain buried for a few more hours. You look beautiful, I told her, meaning it completely. Thank you for being so supportive through all of this, she said, hugging me carefully to avoid wrinkling her dress. I know the money situation with your college has been stressful, and I appreciate you not letting that affect the wedding. The comment stung more than she could have known. Chloe still had no idea that her wedding had been funded by my college money, or that my education was now being paid for by her future father-in-law. The web of financial relationships connecting our families had become so complex that telling the complete truth would require charts and diagrams. I want you to be happy, I said simply, which was entirely true even if it wasn't the whole truth. The ceremony itself was everything Chloe had dreamed of and more. The Riverside Country Club had been transformed into a garden paradise with thousands of white roses, elegant draping, and ambient lighting that made everything look like a movie set. Watching my sister walk down the aisle toward Jake, both of them radiant with joy, I felt a complicated mixture of happiness for them and sadness for the deception that surrounded their union. David Morrison sat in the front row with other members of Jake's family, and seeing him in person for the first time was like looking at a genetic preview of what Jake might become in 25 years. Distinguished silver hair, sharp business attire even at a wedding, and an alert intelligence in his eyes that missed nothing. When the officiant asked if anyone objected to the union, my heart nearly stopped, though of course no one spoke up. The ceremony concluded without incident, and as the wedding party moved to a private area for photographs, I found myself alone at the cocktail hour with Jake's extended family and my parents' friends. I was nursing a glass of sparkling cider and making polite conversation with my mother's coworkers when a familiar voice spoke behind me. You must be Emma. Jake has told me so much about his brilliant future sister-in-law. I turned to find David Morrison standing close enough that I could see the intelligence and calculation in his eyes that photographs had only hinted at. He was shorter than I'd expected but carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to commanding attention and respect. Mr. Morrison, I replied, extending my hand for what felt like the most surreal handshake of my life. Thank you for everything you've done to make this wedding possible. Chloe is absolutely glowing. Please, call me David. And you're quite welcome. Jake loves your sister deeply, and family celebrations are worth the investment. He studied my face with an intensity that made me wonder if he saw the resemblance I'd noticed between Jake and myself. I understand you're heading to Northwestern in the fall. Impressive school. Yes, I'm excited about the opportunity. I'll be starting in their pre-nursing program with plans to specialize in pediatrics. Pre-nursing, he repeated thoughtfully. Have you considered the pre-med track instead? With your academic record, you'd certainly qualify. The suggestion caught me completely off guard. Not only because it echoed Dr. Chen's recent recommendation, but because it suggested David Morrison knew far more about my academic achievements than casual conversation with Jake could have revealed. I've started exploring that possibility, I said carefully. Though medical school is a significant financial commitment. Financial considerations shouldn't limit academic potential, he replied with the casual confidence of someone who had never worried about money. There are numerous scholarship opportunities for students committed to pediatric medicine, especially those interested in serving underserved populations. The conversation was veering into territory that felt dangerous. How could I discuss scholarship opportunities with the man who was already anonymously funding my education? How could I talk about financial limitations with my biological father who had the resources to eliminate those limitations entirely? That's encouraging to hear, I managed. I'm still researching all my options. Smart approach. Thorough research and careful planning tend to yield better outcomes than impulsive decisions. He paused, studying me again with that penetrating gaze. You know, you remind me of myself at your age. Very focused, very methodical. Those are valuable traits in medicine. The comment about resemblance made my chest tight with emotion. Here was my biological father, commenting on similarities between us while maintaining the fiction that we were strangers meeting for the first time. Either he was an exceptional actor, or he genuinely didn't see the family connection that seemed obvious to me. Jake mentioned that you might be interested in hearing about Northwestern's research opportunities, David continued. I have some connections in the medical field there. Would you be interested in some introductions? Now I was certain he knew more about my situation than he was letting on. Jake wouldn't have known about my interest in Northwestern research opportunities. Because I'd only recently decided to pursue them. That's very generous of you, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Though I prefer to make my own connections when possible. I find that opportunities mean more when you earn them independently. Something shifted in David Morrison's expression, surprise, perhaps, or approval. An admirable philosophy. Independence and self-reliance are undervalued qualities in your generation. I had good teachers, I replied, thinking of Robert's influence on my values and work ethic. Indeed. Your parents seem like remarkable people. It takes real sacrifice to raise children who are both ambitious and grounded. The praise for my parents, especially Robert, was unexpected and oddly touching. Whatever complicated feelings David Morrison might have about his role in my life, he seemed genuinely respectful of the people who had actually raised me. Our conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the wedding party, and I excused myself to join the family photographs. But as I smiled for the camera while standing next to my sister and her new husband, I couldn't shake the feeling that my conversation with David Morrison had been more than casual small talk. He had been evaluating me, testing my responses, perhaps trying to understand what kind of person I'd become without his influence. The reception dinner passed in a blur of toasts, elaborate courses, and carefully orchestrated celebrations. I found myself seated at a table with Jake's cousins and college friends, far enough from the head table to observe David Morrison throughout the evening without appearing to stare. He was clearly in his element at social events, moving easily between conversations and displaying the kind of practiced charm that successful businessmen cultivate over decades. What struck me most was watching his interaction with Jake. There was genuine affection there, mixed with what appeared to be high expectations and subtle pressure. David Morrison clearly loved his son, but he also seemed to be constantly evaluating Jake's performance, measuring him against some internal standard that wasn't entirely clear. During the father-son dance, I watched David Morrison's face as he moved around the dance floor with Jake. For just a moment, his businessman facade slipped, and I saw something that looked like regret or longing. It was the expression of someone who understood that important moments could never be reclaimed once they passed, and who perhaps had more experience with loss than his successful exterior suggested. The evening's most challenging moment came during the bouquet toss. As all the single women gathered on the dance floor, Chloe called out specific encouragement to me. Emma, this could be you next. You're going to meet so many interesting people at Northwestern. I found myself standing in the crowd of laughing women, many of whom were Jake's cousins who had been friendly throughout the evening. When Chloe threw the bouquet, it sailed directly toward me with the kind of precision that suggested she'd aimed it deliberately. I caught it reflexively, which prompted cheers and applause from the wedding guests. Looks like romance is in your future, David Morrison commented as I returned to my table, bouquet in hand. I'm more focused on academics than dating, I replied. Honestly. Another wise approach. Focus on building yourself first, and the right relationships will follow naturally. The advice felt bizarrely paternal coming from someone who was technically a stranger, yet it was exactly the kind of guidance I might have expected from a father figure. The cognitive dissonance of receiving life advice from David Morrison while knowing our true relationship was almost overwhelming. As the evening wound down and guests began leaving, I helped my family collect wedding favors and personal items. Jake found me near the coat check and pulled me aside for a private conversation. "Emma, I wanted to thank you for spending time with my dad tonight. He really enjoyed talking with you. He seems like an interesting man. Very knowledgeable about a lot of topics. He was impressed with you," Jake continued. "He mentioned that you remind him of himself when he was younger. That's high praise from him. He doesn't say things like that lightly." The comment confirmed what I'd suspected during our conversation. David Morrison had seen something familiar in me, whether or not he consciously recognized the family connection. "That's flattering," I said carefully. "He also said something interesting. He thinks you should consider pre-med instead of nursing, and he offered to help connect you with some opportunities in the medical field." Jake paused, studying my reaction. "Emma, my dad doesn't usually take that kind of interest in people he's just met. I think he sees real potential in you." The irony was almost unbearable. David Morrison was offering to help advance my medical career while maintaining the fiction that we were strangers, and his son was encouraging me to accept help from my biological father without knowing our relationship. "I appreciate the offer," I said finally. "Though I prefer to develop my own professional relationships when possible." "I get that, and I respect it. But Emma, sometimes accepting help from people who believe in you isn't a sign of weakness. It's a sign of wisdom." The conversation echoed my earlier discussions with Mrs. Patterson and Robert about accepting David Morrison's scholarship funding. Everyone seemed to be telling me that taking help when it was offered wasn't compromising my independence, but rather demonstrating good judgment. As we drove home that night, my family was exhausted but happy. Chloe was practically glowing with satisfaction at how perfectly everything had gone, and my parents seemed relieved that the expensive celebration had been worth the financial sacrifice they thought they'd made. "David Morrison seems like a genuinely nice man," my mother commented from the front seat. "Very down-to-earth for someone so successful." "He certainly took an interest in Emma," Robert observed, glancing at me in the rearview mirror. "Asked me a lot of questions about your academic plans and career goals." My heart skipped. "What kind of questions?" "Just showing interest in your future. He mentioned that Jake had told him about your Northwestern acceptance and wanted to know more about your field of study. Seemed impressed with your work ethic and maturity." The conversation suggested that David Morrison had been gathering information about me from multiple sources throughout the evening. Not just our direct conversation, but discussions with my parents and observations of my interactions with other guests. He was conducting some kind of evaluation, though his ultimate purpose remained unclear. That night, lying in bed while replaying every moment of my interaction with David Morrison, I realized that the wedding had fundamentally changed our relationship whether he intended it or not. We were no longer complete strangers connected only by biology and an anonymous scholarship. We had met, conversed, evaluated each other, and established the foundation for some kind of ongoing relationship. The question was what would happen next. David Morrison had expressed interest in helping advance my medical career, which suggested he might be considering a more active role in my life. But he had also maintained the fiction of anonymity regarding the scholarship, which suggested he wasn't ready for complete honesty about our connection. Meanwhile, I was heading to Northwestern in 2 weeks with funding from my biological father, carrying secrets that could potentially impact my sister's marriage, and trying to figure out how to build a relationship with David Morrison without betraying Robert or compromising my own values. The wedding that was supposed to be the happy culmination of months of planning had instead become the opening scene of a much more complex family drama. And unlike the carefully choreographed celebration we'd just witnessed, this next chapter would be entirely improvised. 2 years had passed since Chloe's wedding, and I was sitting in the advanced anatomy lab at Northwestern University, dissecting a cadaver with my study partner Marcus when my phone vibrated with an unexpected call. The caller ID showed Morrison Foundation, which immediately caught my attention since I hadn't heard from them since accepting the scholarship. "Emma Rodriguez speaking," I answered, stepping out of the lab into the hallway. "Emma, this is Patricia from the Morrison Foundation. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." "Not at all. Is everything okay with my scholarship renewal?" "Your scholarship is fine, your academic performance has been exemplary. I'm actually calling about something different. Mr. Morrison would like to meet with you in person to discuss some opportunities that might interest you." My heart rate spiked. For 2 years, David Morrison had maintained his distance while funding my education. I'd completed my pre-nursing requirements with a 4.0 GPA, switched to pre-med as he'd suggested, and had been accepted into Northwestern's accelerated medical program. Throughout this time, I'd occasionally wondered if he was monitoring my progress, but there had been no direct contact. What kind of opportunities? I asked carefully. He mentioned research positions and medical school planning. Apparently, he's been following your academic achievements and would like to discuss your future plans. The conversation I'd been both anticipating and dreading for 2 years was finally happening. When and where would he like to meet? Next weekend, if you're available. He has business in Chicago and could meet you for lunch on Saturday. I agreed to the meeting while my mind raced through the implications. After 2 years of anonymous support, David Morrison was ready to have a direct conversation about my future. The question was whether he was also ready to acknowledge our biological relationship or if he planned to continue the elaborate fiction that we were merely scholarship donor and recipient. That evening, I called Robert to tell him about the meeting request. Our relationship had only grown stronger since the revelation about my biological father, and I'd come to value his perspective on complex emotional situations. What do you think he wants? Robert asked after I explained the call. I'm not sure. Maybe he wants to increase his involvement in my education, or maybe he's finally ready to acknowledge our relationship. How do you feel about that possibility? It was the question I'd been avoiding. Confused. Part of me has always wanted to know him, to understand where I came from genetically and what traits I inherited from his side. But another part of me feels like it would be disloyal to you to pursue a relationship with him. Emma, listen to me carefully, Robert said in his most serious father voice. You pursuing a relationship with your biological father doesn't diminish what we have. I've been your dad for 20 years, through skin knees and homework help. And driving lessons and everything else that matters. That doesn't change because you're curious about your DNA. But what if he wants to become a real father figure now? What if he tries to take credit for my achievements or influence my decisions? Then you set boundaries. You're not the 18-year-old girl who first learned about this situation. You're a mature medical student who's proven she can make excellent decisions independently. Trust yourself to handle whatever he throws at you. The confidence in Robert's voice reminded me of how much I'd grown during my time at Northwestern. The tentative, people-pleasing girl who had worried about disappointing everyone had evolved into someone who could stand up for her values while remaining open to new relationships and opportunities. Saturday arrived with typical Chicago autumn weather, crisp and clear with the kind of bright sunlight that made everything seem possible. I'd chosen to meet David Morrison at a small restaurant near campus, somewhere I felt comfortable and confident rather than on his chosen territory. He arrived exactly on time, looking every bit the successful businessman in a tailored suit and expensive watch. But there was something different about his demeanor compared to our brief interaction at Chloe's wedding. He seemed less guarded, more genuinely interested in conversation rather than evaluation. Emma, thank you for agreeing to meet with me. You look well, Northwestern clearly agrees with you. Thank you for the scholarship opportunity. It's changed my life in ways I couldn't have imagined. We ordered lunch and exchanged small talk about Chicago weather and my classes until our food arrived. Then David Morrison set down his fork and looked directly at me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. Emma, I think it's time we had an honest conversation about why I offered you that scholarship and what I hope our relationship might become going forward. Here it was. The moment I'd been preparing for since that first phone call from Patricia. I've been wondering about that myself, I said carefully. I know about the family connection, he said simply. I've known since the day Linda told me she was pregnant. 20 years ago. I've followed your academic progress, your achievements, your character development from a distance. The scholarship wasn't anonymous generosity, it was a father trying to provide for his daughter in the only way he felt was appropriate. The admission hit me with surprising emotional force. For 2 years, I'd suspected this truth, but hearing him acknowledge it directly was overwhelming. Why the distance? Why the elaborate anonymous foundation instead of just being my father? David Morrison was quiet for a long moment, considering his words. Because I was a coward. When Linda told me she was pregnant, I was terrified of the responsibility and the potential impact on my career and social standing. I was going through a messy divorce, building a business, and completely unprepared for fatherhood. He paused. I convinced myself that financial support was enough, that you'd be better off with a father figure who actually wanted to be present rather than one who felt trapped by obligation. And Robert filled that role. Robert exceeded that role. From everything I've observed, he's been an exceptional father to you. He provided the stability, love, and guidance that I wasn't mature enough to offer at 25. The honesty in his voice was unexpected. I'd prepared for manipulation, guilt trips, or attempts to minimize his abandonment. Instead, he was taking full responsibility for his choices and acknowledging Robert's superior parenting. So why reach out now? What's changed? I've changed. Watching Jake grow up taught me what I missed with you. Seeing your academic achievements and character development from afar made me realize that financial support, while helpful, wasn't nearly enough. He leaned forward slightly. Emma, I don't expect you to suddenly start calling me dad or to forgive 20 years of absence. But I would like the opportunity to know you as a person and to support your goals in more meaningful ways than anonymous scholarships. What would that look like practically? Medical school mentorship, research opportunities, professional connections that could advance your career. Not because you owe me anything, but because you're brilliant and ambitious and deserving of every advantage available. The offer was tempting, but I'd learned to think strategically about accepting help. And in exchange? Nothing. No expectations, no obligations, no demands on your time or emotions. If you're willing, I'd like to have occasional conversations about your goals and challenges. If you're not comfortable with that, the scholarship and professional support continue regardless. It was exactly the kind of boundary-respecting approach that might have worked if he'd tried it 18 years earlier. But it also raised new questions about timing and motivation. David, can I ask you something directly? Of course. Jake and Chloe have been married for 2 years now. Do they know about our relationship? His expression became carefully controlled. No. Linda and I agreed long ago that this information would remain private unless you decided to share it. But it affects them too. Jake is my half-brother. And Chloe is married to her sister's half-brother without knowing it. Genetically, Jake and Chloe have no family connection. Their relationship isn't complicated by biology. It's complicated by deception. They have a right to know about family relationships that affect them. David Morrison was quiet for several minutes, processing this perspective. Finally, he spoke with obvious reluctance. You're right. But the revelation would be disruptive to their marriage and potentially damaging to Jake's relationship with me. I've been hoping we could maintain the status quo until the timing was more appropriate. When would the timing ever be appropriate for that kind of revelation? I don't know, he admitted. I've been focusing on building a relationship with you rather than solving the broader family complications. His honesty was both refreshing and frustrating. Here was a man capable of running a multi-million-dollar business who was apparently paralyzed by the emotional complexity of family relationships. David, I appreciate your offer to mentor my medical career, and I'm not opposed to getting to know you better. But I won't be part of an elaborate deception that affects my sister's marriage. If we're going to have a relationship, it needs to be built on honesty. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we tell Jake and Chloe the truth. Together. Soon. The proposal clearly terrified him, but after a long pause, he nodded slowly. You're right. They deserve to know, and continuing the deception isn't fair to anyone involved. We spent the rest of lunch planning how to approach Jake and Chloe with the truth. David would arrange a family dinner at his house, ostensibly to celebrate my academic achievements. During the evening, we would find an appropriate moment to explain the family connections and history that had been hidden for so long. 2 weeks later, I found myself sitting in David Morrison's elegant dining room with Jake, Chloe, and both my parents. The gathering was supposed to be a celebration of my acceptance into Northwestern's accelerated medical program, but everyone seemed to sense that something more significant was happening. Before we start dinner, David began, his voice more nervous than I'd ever heard it. Emma and I have something important to share with everyone. I took a deep breath and looked around the table at the people I loved most. What we're about to tell you might be shocking, but it's something you all deserve to know. The conversation that followed was one of the most difficult of my life. Watching Jake's face as he realized I was his half-sister, seeing Chloe process the implications for her marriage, observing my parents navigate their own complex emotions about the revelation, it was emotionally exhausting for everyone involved. But it was also liberating. For the first time in 2 years, I could be completely honest with my family about my relationship with David Morrison, my funding source, and the complicated feelings I'd been carrying alone. So that's why you always seemed familiar, Jake said finally, after the initial shock had passed. I kept thinking there was something about you that reminded me of family, but I couldn't figure out what it was. Are you okay with this? I asked him directly. Finding out you have a half-sister you didn't know about? Are you kidding? I always wanted a sibling growing up. Finding out I've had a brilliant sister all along is amazing. He paused thoughtfully. Though it does make family dinners more complicated. Chloe had been quieter throughout the conversation, processing implications I couldn't fully understand. Finally, she spoke up. Emma, I need you to know something. I've suspected for months that our family had secrets I didn't understand. The scholarship, the way Mom and Dad acted nervous whenever David's name came up, the fact that you seemed to know more about family finances than you were letting on. She reached across the table to squeeze my hand. I'm relieved to finally know the truth, even if it's complicated. The evening concluded with tentative plans for future family gatherings that would include David Morrison as my biological father, rather than just Jake's dad. It would take time for everyone to adjust to the new family dynamics, but the foundation for honest relationships had been established. 3 years later, I graduated from Northwestern Medical School with highest honors and a specialization in pediatric oncology. The graduation ceremony was attended by both my fathers, Robert, who had raised me with love and sacrifice, and David, who had supported my education and become a trusted mentor and friend. My relationship with David Morrison had evolved into something neither of us had initially expected. He wasn't trying to replace Robert as my father, and I wasn't looking for a replacement dad. Instead, we built a unique relationship based on shared interests in medicine and science, along with the complicated affection that comes from recognizing inherited traits and perspectives. Jake and I had become genuine siblings, bonding over our shared methodical approach to problem solving and our mutual appreciation for Chloe's more spontaneous personality. Their marriage had grown stronger rather than weaker from knowing the full truth about family relationships. Most importantly, I'd learned that family isn't just about biology or legal relationships. It's about the people who choose to love and support you consistently over time. Robert would always be my dad because he'd earned that title through 20 years of faithful parenting. David was my biological father and had become a valued mentor because we'd both chosen to build something meaningful from a complicated beginning. The betrayal that had started this entire journey, my parents using my college fund for Chloe's wedding, seemed almost insignificant compared to what it had ultimately led to. Without that financial crisis, I might never have applied for scholarships, never connected with David Morrison, never discovered my biological heritage, and never pushed myself to pursue medical school instead of nursing. As I began my pediatric oncology residency at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, I carried with me the knowledge that sometimes the most devastating betrayals can become the catalysts for the most profound personal growth. My family had betrayed my trust, but in fighting to reclaim my future, I discovered strengths I never knew I possessed and built relationships I never could have imagined. The anonymous scholarship that had saved my education turned out to be the least important gift David Morrison gave me. The real gift was the opportunity to see that identity isn't determined by circumstances or other people's choices. Identity is determined by how we respond to challenges, how we treat the people who love us, and what we choose to build from whatever foundation we're given. Today, as Dr. Emma Rodriguez, I work with children fighting cancer and their families navigating impossible circonstances. Every day, I see the profound difference that genuine support can make in someone's life. Some of my patients have families like the one Robert built for me, cobbled together through choice and love rather than biology. Others have families like the one David Morrison and I created, complex relationships built on honesty and mutual respect despite difficult histories. All of them remind me that the most important inheritance isn't money or DNA. It's the knowledge that you have the power to write your own story, regardless of how other people's choices affect the opening chapters. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.